Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Today on the drive we've got an example of Honda's CB500X, and today we're going to have a look at what it's like to ride, hints and tips, and what you'd look for if you were buying one second hand or even new. Let's take a look. Okay, so the CB500X that we've got on the drive today comes from a long line of Honda middleweight twins, right back from the CB250 and 400 Super Dream of the 80s, through the CB500 and 500S of the 90s, right up to these ones. And of course this model is a variant of the CB500F, the Roadster, and the CB500R, which is the race-derived version with the slightly lower handlebars, etc. But today we're going to be looking at the X. So let's have a look at how the models have progressed throughout the years. They started back in 2013. So launched just after the F and the R variants, the X came along in July of 2013. All three variants use a 471cc 180 degree crank 4-stroke twin with near identical bore and stroke of 67mm, producing around 47 horsepower or 35 kilowatts at 8,500 revs and 43 newton meters or 32 foot-pounds of torque at around 7,000 RPM. Drives obviously through a 6-speed box, obviously to the rear via a 520 sized chain. I believe the US models might produce a couple more horsepower, 49 maybe. Please let me know in the comments below if I've got that wrong, because I believe ours were deliberately designed to hit with the A2 licenses. The tyres at the front are 120 by 70 by 17, and at the rear is a 120 by 70 17. Brakes were a single 320mm rotor at the front and a 240mm rotor at the rear, and ABS was included for most markets. Seat height was 810, which is 25mm higher than the F and the R models, and the weight was around 194 kilos. So in 2016 saw a revised model to make them Euro 4 compliant for Europe, with a different exhaust, a switch to an LED headlamp, along with some minor suspension and bodywork changes. The F and the R variants gained a slightly larger fuel tank. 2019 saw a larger revision and a deliberate styling change to give it a more adventure-like stance. So the exhaust changed again, it gained a slipper clutch, new LCD instruments, which we'll take a look at in a minute, full LED lighting now, and most obviously the new 19-inch front wheel with a 110 by 80 19. Seat height has increased another 20mm now to 830mm, and ABS remains standard for most markets but still optional in the US for some reason, and weight crept up by 3 kilos. So in 2022, 3 years later, we saw some further major and worthwhile updates. A switch to show as inverted SFFBP, separate function fork, big piston, was giving a much improved front end feel, which I'll talk about a bit more in a moment, and also twin front discs up front, which had been something that many riders have been asking for. New fuel injection and a revised ECU map gives more torque, a lighter swing arm, a lighter radiator, and a revised rear shock and a new designed front wheel. The LED headlamp was also updated to improve the output, because this was also one of the things that owners had flagged. All models achieve around 80 miles per gallon Imperial, or high 60s if you're in the US, and they top out around 110 miles an hour. The current ones weigh in at around 199 kilos according to Honda. I'll just do a bit of a quick walk around, and looking at the front, this is probably where most of the changes over the years have happened. This is a 22 model, as I said, and you can see it's got the twin rotors and the upside down forks, and obviously the bigger 19-inch wheel. And I have to say, unlike the Africa Twin, where I found the big front wheel on the front to give a little bit of vagueness, I haven't found that with this. It feels very planted and very easy to ride. More of that in a moment. But all good improvements, all worthwhile having, and if you're looking for one and can afford it, the 22 model I think is the one to go for. Here is the parallel twin engine that we know and love. Desperately reliable. We'll go through the pros and cons in a sec, as I say. What's not to like? Known to be very reliable. The only issue that I can pick out really, apart from some things are a little bit difficult on the servicing side of things, is that the water pump has a bit of a tendency to take an early bath. So just keep that at the back of your mind, that the only slight weakness seems to be the water pump. As you can see here, it's one of the easy ones for Honda. They've actually decided, rather than the usual or the more common screw-in thing to check the oil level, this one's got a sight glass, and frankly I find that a lot easier to get on with, so more of those in the future, please, Honda. And then just a small thing, it's got a really nice looking swing arm on the back of this. Now I don't know if it's alloy or not, it looks like it might be alloy. It's certainly nicer put together than the plain Jane steel item on the NC750, which I've also got in the garage at the moment, and very nice it looks too, I think it's fair to say. There has been some discussion, I know, because the adjusters here have changed on the 22. I think they used to be back here, so they sort of swung it around. I think some people find this a little bit less easy to get on with, but nonetheless, all looks very smart and easy to adjust, I think. So here we've got the water pump. If you see of any leaks or you hear of any unusual noises from this area, just suspect that the water pump may be at fault. It's not a major job to do, it's all obviously external, and it's something you should be able to do at home without any problems whatsoever. Going up here, now I try not to say too much or too many comments about the NC750. I'm going to do a separate video comparing the two, but the seat on the NC750 is notoriously bad. Pleased to announce, certainly on the 22, the seat on this one is absolutely lovely. I've done a few hours in it already, no complaints whatsoever, really comfortable and everything that a seat should be on a bike like this. Okay, and looking at the handlebars, it's all very standard fare here. It's all quite basic, but none the worse for that. You obviously got your headlight switch here, you got your horn, and you got your indicators. Never had a problem finding either of these on the testing today, so that's all good stuff. On the other side, again, it's as basic as it comes really. You've got the kill switch, you've got the start, and you've got the hazards here, which is a nice touch, I guess. Onto the instruments. Excuse my finger. Now, personally, I'm not the greatest fan of the reverse LCDs, but I have to say this one, throughout today, I've been riding in cloudy conditions, in bright sunshine, etc., etc., and I never had a problem reading it. So, not a natural fan, but I have to say, no problems found today when I was using the bike. So, all good there, thumbs up. Okay, so what's it like to ride? Well, around town, it's lovely, basically. The clutch is super light, like all slipper clutches. The throttle response is very smooth and not jerking in any way. It's very linear, very progressive. Suspension is very supple to the point of feeling almost too soft. And the seat is wonderfully comfortable. So around town, it's all good. The engine is sufficiently punchy as well to work really well. Going out on faster A and B roads, it still all holds together. As I say, the suspension is quite soft, but it's so comfortable it's hard to criticise it, especially when it's being aimed at A2 riders, people who are beginners coming up from 125s. But it still works just as well for someone like me who's been riding for many, many years. Unless you're a sports bike fan, then obviously you'll probably find the suspension a little bit soft, shall we say. Going out onto faster roads, onto the faster A roads and perhaps the motorway, it does start to become a little bit compromised, I guess. For most of the time it's absolutely fine, but when you get into the really fast road conditions like motorways and you're really going for an overtake, it's not lacking in punch. It's not lacking in punch. I was quite surprised. I thought it might struggle a bit more than it does, but it doesn't. But it achieves that by having quite low gearing. So it's revving away quite hard when you're doing 70. To the extent that some people put a 16-tooth sprocket on the front to bring the revs down, and they say it still doesn't lose too much of the punch. That's probably a good compromise to look into if it causes you a problem. But again, in the 50 to 70 range, it's still got good roll-on power, just as good in my experience as the NC750, and I was quite surprised about that. It doesn't feel slow, and I think part of that is down to the low gearing, a good solid engine, and also the fact that it's quite light for what it is. I think it's about 199 kilos, which compared to what I'm used to anyways is quite light. Okay, so that's what it's like on the road. So overall, what are the pros and cons? Well, it's easy going, it's easy to ride, as I said, with a light clutch and a smooth gearbox, and it's punchy up to the legal limit. easy to handle, light to handle, weighs 199 kilos and doesn't feel it. It hides its weight very well. The economy is very good. I've been cruising around doing a bit of mixed riding today, sort of typical commuting stuff, I guess, and I'm getting anywhere between basically high 80s miles per gallon. That's imperial, obviously. Good value. It's 6,700, well, that's what it's listed out on the Honda website at the moment. Worth bearing in mind that the CB500F, if you like the engine but don't feel you need the adventure type styling, is £700 less, so you can get that for just on £6,000, which is not a bad deal, I think. Reliability is very good. Obviously there's a slight question mark over the water pump that some people find, but not a major problem, I don't think, and it's something that's easy to fix. I have seen, when I was doing the research online, people with high mileage ones with few problems, and one being sold with the original engine, no problems, 187,000 on the clock. So I think it's fairly safe to say that the fundamental design of the engine is pretty much bulletproof. So what about the negatives? And genuinely having to scratch around for things here, but this is as I see it. The engine is a little bit bland, and it is a little bit vibey because it's a 180-degree crank. And obviously most things these days, they discovered that putting a 270-degree crank in it makes it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more characterful, such as the Honda's new Hornet. It's also down on power from the 500 twins from 20 years ago, but this is the way of the world with emission challenges. Not by much, but it's kind of worthy of note. But it never feels lacking in power. It's fine around town, as I say, up to around 60, 65. It's absolutely fine. Above that, it's a little bit busy. And increasingly, I've heard that people who do a lot of high mileage or high speed work have changed the front sprocket to a 16 tooth. So you may wish to consider doing that. Check out online if you want to do that, because I think some people have said you may have to cut away at the cover over the front sprocket, so worth having a look at that. Obviously I'm talking about 22 year model, and a lot of the issues that people have raised on the older bikes have now been addressed. So the suspension is better, the headlight is better, so there's lots of things there that have been improved. I did point out in the Walkaround that the chain adjusters have been swapped to the front of the axle from the back, and some people have said that's a little bit more fiddly. Again, the earlier models, the suspension is not quite so great. It's only got a single front disc, and these are downsides, and you may wish to consider whether it's actually worth trying to stretch to a 22 model, because genuinely for once I think the difference is worth having. Okay, on to servicing. I thought I'd just do a little bit here because I know some people often ask questions if they're in the forums or wherever. They like to say, what oil do I use, when do you need to do the oils and filter, etc, etc. So just picking out a bit from the owner's manual. Oil and filter 8K. Now there's always the debate about, do you change the filter every other change or every time you change the oil? We all know that Honda and all the other manufacturers say every other time. I think everyone in their right mind changes the filter at the same time of the oil. So certainly I would do the oil and filter at 8K. The air cleaner is every 12,000 miles, and the plugs are every 16,000 miles. And I'll put in the comments below because I needed to look up and see when the valve adjustments are done. I think it's at 16K. If it's different from that, I'll put it in the comments below and pin it. What I do know is that people who said who had them for a long time find that the valve clearances just don't go out of whack. 9 times out of 10 when they're checked, they're absolutely fine, so that's really good stuff. I mentioned the sight window, so it's really easy to check the oil level, which I think is a big plus. And there's always going to be discussions about which oil do you use. And Honda have become a bit more strict on this recently, whereas they used to say the recommended oil is, and then it was invariably a 10W30, they're now saying that the oil must meet all these criteria, one of which is the 10W30 grade. And if you look on the screen now, the other specs are listed in the manual that it has to change. Other things that when I've talked around to the guys in the forum, and thanks guys for your feedback, really helps me putting this together, so really thank you for that. Plugs can be a pain to change on these. As you can see, the head is right up under the tank, so it's a little bit of a pain to get to. So plugs are a pain. You do have to remove the battery to change the air cleaner, I'm told, which seems a bit nuts to me. And a bit of a weird one, when you're changing the oil, it can shoot it out at an angle. So when you're doing it, try and get a funnel or something in there to try and direct it, otherwise the oil goes everywhere. Okay, so if you were looking for one second hand and you were looking to see what to look out for, if you like, what problems there may be, it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it, that Honda give bulletproof reliability, but these are pretty much as bulletproof as you're going to get on any bike these days. Are there any issues at all? Well, yes, there are a few. There's some cost cutting gone on, and certain people have said that the chain of sprockets don't last very long, or the wheel bearings wear out too quickly. So 25 to 30,000 people have been replacing some wheel bearings, and sort of things perhaps that are consumables, even fork seals on the old right way up forks. People have said the fork seals have gone a little bit too early. So something to bear in mind, but nothing really that's too critical, no fundamental problems with the engine or anything of that nature. And the water pump issue is well documented. I think we certainly talked about it today, and that's pretty much the only kind of engineering type fault, apart from the cost cutting type stuff. It's only the kind of engineering issue that I certainly seen and can dig out on these. So overall, a really good ride, a really good safe bet second hand. I would suggest water pump, keep an eye on that, but it's not a big job if it does go. And a useful set of upgrades as you go through the model years. So basically buy as new as you can afford, and you will reap the benefits from those upgrades. But be safe in the knowledge, if you can only afford to go for the older ones rather, that reliability still seems to be absolutely rock solid. So it's an absolutely great buy.